Yeah, so how y'all doing out there, man? I'm Taj Murdock, CEO and founder of Mentorship's mentoring program. Our mission is empowerment through exposure. We have our nonprofit, which is the Empowerment Achievement Movement, or we call it Team Inc. But it's also the acronym, the TEAM, the Empowerment Achievement Movement. Is also a movement to achieve empowerment together. But Men Occurs is our pilot program, empowerment through exposure. That exposure is important for our young men because of the fact that they need to see life outside their direct environment, but now also vicariously through social media. But that mission of empowerment through exposure is personal to me because I remember being a youth myself and being troubled, misguided, and just trying to understand life from a lens of not having a father around or an example and got in trouble with the law for the first time at 16 years old. And not having that father figure was a friend of the family that owned a chain of barbershop, Share Magic. To this day, I'm indebted to Jared Holland, who gave me a job cleaning up in the barbershop. But the one thing that he didn't realize was that, the job wasn't for cutting hair, but just, picking up a broom, cleaning clippers, and how that broom became my baton and how that barbershop became my launch pad. And I say that because it exposed me to something that I never thought of. I was like most kids in the inner city, playing basketball, running around, doing crazy stuff, got into selling drugs. And when I got caught up that opportunity, that exposure of being in the barbershop, being exposed to men, having conversation with men, but more importantly, that exposure to a gift that I never even knew that I had. Started off cutting my own hair, and then learning how to cut hair through that. And through the encouragement of the brothers in the shop, I went back to high school because I was a high school dropout at the time and chose to go the path of being a barber. Went to barber school, got my license, and then was in the barber industry. And while I was moving through the industry, there was another moment of exposure that truthfully changed my life. Because one, the exposure to barbering was that developing that gift that I never knew I had. But then a close friend of mine who I went to high school at Simon Gratz with, my man Rasheed Wallace, he placed a call at the time and asked me to be his barber. So now this, never thought of this career path, being exposed to that, to now being exposed to seeing life outside of Philadelphia, traveling around the country with a NBA player, getting a chance to meet and fellowship with other NBA players, cut their hair. This is something that, like I always say, like I'm just a kid from North Philly. But these opportunities allowed me to be able to see life outside the city, but also opportunities of, like I said, being able to, just have a good life. Uh, those moments, again, are some moments that a lot of people may never have. These are things that people dream of, but it all came from that moment of exposure. It all came from creating opportunities through that exposure that people allowed for me. And things were good. One thing I say is that, like, we as men, we indirectly taught, what makes us a man. Nice clothes, pocket full of money, nice car, and a handful of women. For somebody who was living that life, I realized one thing though, no amount of money and no level of status could heal your childhood traumas. So being in that position of, living a good life, so I thought, but having a lot of unhealed traumas and dealing with certain things coming back to the city and, people hating on the lifestyle that you have and everything is like 2006, working in a barbershop and guys that I work with, just kind of envious, of the life. They were plotting against me, and trying to really, do harm, rob me, whatever. So catching wind of that, having to defend myself, I'm actually the one that ended up catching a gun case in 2006. So from that gun case, I was actually looking at 7 to 15 years because I had hollow points in the gun. I also had one in the chamber. The only thing that kind of spared me was that at one point I was licensed to carry. I had moved out of the state for a while and had my license had expired. So during that time frame, getting caught the firearm, I fought the case, I rumbled the case, and I was able to beat the case and get probation. But during that time span, just dealing with so much distress from childhood, even the pressure of success, what a lot of people don't talk about, just being able to like thinking about my family, feeling like I'm leaving people behind and all like that. Again, a lot of those traumas was coming up. So that's when addiction got the best of me. Just the party, that lifestyle, drinking, getting high, stuff like that. And I actually ended up catching a DUI that was a violation of that probation. So I ended up serving 2 years in prison from 2008 to 2010. But it was in that moment where, again, you live in this lifestyle, you partying NBA All-Star weekends, shaking hands with the who's who. I mean, even opportunities to meet the late great Kobe Bryant. So as a Lakers fan, that's like one of those moments of my life where it's like, yo, like this is crazy. But to take away from that and now be in prison and lose everything, going from having the business, the cars, again, the women, all that, the lifestyle, to washing your drawers in the sink, you're first with that question, like, well, who am I now? Because the one thing that we face as men, in particular as black men, that, our identity is attached to what we accomplish and the success. So to be in that position of losing it all and having to ask yourself that question, it was transformative to me, because that was the moment where I had to start going inward and start asking those questions of how did I get here? And that was my first like exposure to like critical thinking, or what I like to call forecast, and how one decision can affect a moment or a lifetime. But it was in that moment, serving those 2 years, man, two things happened. One thing happened in terms of my faith was increased, because going from somebody who was a go-getter to being in a position where you can't do nothing for yourself, I had to lean on God. And I could say that for the 2 years, I didn't need or want for anything. There was a moment where I was going to a Bible study, really just to keep my own sanity, because everything that I'm losing. And the brother over here that was teaching the Bible study, he lost his case. So as he going upstate, he like, Murdock, I need you to keep this going. And I'm saying to him, like, nah, man, like, I can't do that. Mainly because of the fact of, again, like, I'm going through my own situation of thinking of everything that I lost. Again, 34 years old, business, home, car, like you're losing everything, along with just losing hope, But we talked about it, we prayed on it, man, and I ended up teaching the Bible study, man, and taught the Bible study for like 6 months being at the House of Correction. And it grew, from a steady 6 to like 18. So it was in that moment, like, again, I was like, all right, God, I see what you're doing, and, the brothers was receptive to it. So again, that helped increase my faith, trusting God. And I never forget the time when I had money on me when I got arrested. So that went right to my books. And it was a time when, like, I only had $25 left on my books, and it was time to go to commissary. And all I could do was really pray. Didn't know where it was going to come from. I'm stressing my mom out. Damn, she ain't going to ask her for no money. My lady at the time, she trying to keep the household and things so I wouldn't ask her for nothing either. And I never forget, like, I'm praying and I'm just saying to myself, like, God, like, you said that you're going to provide for me, and just trusting that. And I never forget that same day I got mail, and it was a money order, from one of my elders. And that was like that first sign of like really, really, because I was somewhat saved before, and I say somewhat because I didn't truthfully trust God in that. But for me to really have a heartfelt like conversation with God in that moment, then the next thing that happened is to get a money order. It really sank with me like, yo, God really hears you. He's really listening when your heart is really there. So that was one moment. Then I remember the next time I got into a fight, on D2 with a boy, and it was like they broke the fight up and everything. And it was over the phone, typical stuff over the phone. And it was a lot of threats, you know what I'm saying? Because they broke it up, talking trash and all like that. And again, like, I ain't no in and out of jail type of boy, you know what I mean? So it was like just a situation of, you hearing everything, you seeing everything. So just praying in that, like, like, Lord, what I mean? Just, help me in this situation. And that night, all night long, Murdock, we on you, Murdock, we on you. And I got transferred the very next morning. So again, it was those things where that night I kept saying, Lord, you said that no weapon formed against me shall prosper. So for him to snatch me out of that situation was another awakening for me. So that was the one thing that increased my faith. But also, I saw where a lot of young boys gravitated to me. Sometimes, honestly, in the fact that I didn't even want to be bothered, because I'm in my own head about everything that's happening in my own life. But like, young boys would just gravitate. They wanted, yo, Murdock, can I talk to you? Can I talk to you? So, I'm pouring into them, chopping it up with them. And I'll never forget the one young boy, man, he said to me one time, he was like, yo, Murdock, man, real talk, whenever I see you, man, I know everything gonna be all right. And that moment kind of struck me of how much it meant to have those conversations. So from that point on, like I welcomed the conversations. And I remember I got transferred to another facility, talking to the young boys there, and it's like, again, they gravitate to me, gravitate to me. So when I came home in 2010, you know, focused on trying to get myself together, but I'm seeing so much of the self-destruction in our young men. And I felt like, you know, what could I do? You know, trying to talk to them here and there. And in 2013, I was asked to speak at a career day at Simon Gratz High School. And during that career day, it was my first time being back at Simon Gratz since I graduated. And it was like a surreal full circle moment where here I am here to talk about like my success, you know. They wanted to amplify the travel with the celebrities and all that stuff. But something hit me when I'm looking at a young man sitting in the same seat that I used to sit in. And I said, damn, young, you know what's crazy? I'm sitting here and I keep looking at you. And you might even feel like that. Why always keep looking at me, right? I said, I used to sit in that same seat. And I said, I got to Simon Gratz after being a dropout, and I went to 3 different high schools. So I began to talk to him about, you know, the experience of being a high school dropout, talk to him about the experience of, at that time, being 3 years removed from prison, and just trying to redefine myself, reestablish myself, and just being real authentic with him. And from those conversations, the administration got some letters from some of the young men saying how, you know, they was impressed with everybody's stories and all like that. But really what hit them the most was for me to identify with my challenges, for me to talk about my failures, for me to talk about the adversities in life and how I had to overcome certain things. And in those moments, I said, yeah, this is it. Like, God, I hear you. You know, it's time to really connect with some youngins. And we started a 9-week internship for sophomores at Simon Gratz. And those young men really helped me understand what my purpose in life really was. Genuine conversations, authentic interactions. And then it was the following year come back, they wanted me to quote unquote meet my young men. He's like, oh, last year was great. It was a huge success. We really appreciate all that you did. But your guys is now juniors. So we got to introduce you to a whole new group of guys. And I'm like, nah, I can't do that. Because that's what society does. You know, that's what I experienced in my life, you know, that abandonment as a kid from my father, the abandonment from people in the community, you know, and I didn't want to be another hit on what they really realized, that being let down. So I declined it, and I started having some of those guys come to the barbershop, order pizza, chop it up, you know, and I'll never forget, we had our first real outing, and I took them to the Wax Museum in Baltimore. And for some of those guys, that was their first time ever leaving Philadelphia, let alone North Philly. So it was those moments that sank in, like they were so excited just to leave the city. And my cousin Marquise Coates, he has an organization called Tools for Success, and he encouraged me to start the nonprofit. So in 2015, June 2nd, 2015, I started the nonprofit, you know, started branching out, doing more stuff, having sessions at Simon Gratz, then started having sessions at like Hunting Park, anywhere we can kind of pull up and just meet with the young guys. And those experiences, like I said, that foundation is what got us to the point where we're at now, you know, 10 years later, you know, celebrating the organization and empowering young men. You know, we're grateful to say that in the 10-year span, we have a 100% high school graduation rate. And that's from someone who was once a high school dropout. I understand the challenges. And not to say that these guys haven't had challenges, but I knew how much for me, I just wanted somebody to listen to me. I just wanted somebody to understand me. I just wanted somebody to not talk to me or talk at me, but to kind of lean in and hear my voice and just guide me through some of the things I was dealing with. We got a 0% incarceration rate because, again, I know the challenges that I had and the choices, understanding that, again, one decision can affect a moment or a lifetime. So just helping them with the critical thinking piece and talking to them more about, you know, the why rather than the what. You know, our societies look at the behaviors, you know, but me, I like to get to the core of the behavior. You know, it's not the what, it's the why. Why did that happen? What's going on? How do you feel? What are you thinking? and just helping them to navigate through those things. Well, what's unique about the youth in Philadelphia, man, is it's untapped potential, and that's why that exposure is so important. I find that once they can lock into something, like you really start to see how special they truly are. I mean, Philadelphia is the birthplace of America. We had a lot of talent in Philadelphia, from the Jill Scott, the Music Soul Child, the Will Smiths, so there's a lot of talent here. It's just a lot of it is not really highlighted. And the challenge with that is that because it's such a culture, because it's such a cliche kind of, I call it the city of clones. You know what I'm saying? Like, nobody really wants to be original when it comes down to the city of Philadelphia. So the culture that's been set, a lot of our young men just find themselves like following the path of what's common. It's understandable because of the fact that from a psychological standpoint, they want to fit in, they want to be validated. And there's one thing that I say too, I always say, just the words, "I'm proud of you, son." A lot of men go to the grave and never heard those words. So think of how validating those words are for a young black man, to have a male figure that they respect, that they look up to, saying that they're proud of them. So now these young men, they're left with chasing that validation. And we know that statistically, there's not a lot of men in the household. So what are they mimicking? Where are they getting that, that masculinity, that testosterone? Then they go off to school, in their school age years, it's 75, 76% female teachers, let alone a high percentage of white female teachers. So again, the lack of that male presence that's there to help guide them. So they're not getting it. And then you left at 12, 11, 12, 13 years old, where you're trying to, establish your identity. You know what I mean? So what is that identity being shaped in? Your community. Now, social media, whatever the culture is. It's different things that we did as the culture growing up as well. I'm a victim of that myself, but now it's just so much different because of the impact of social media and the internet. And we know that the algorithms are not working in the favor of our youth because it's going to keep showing them the negativity over and over again. So those things, that programming. And even when I touch on the programming, I say that the difference between the change in the community then versus now, there was always negativity around. I grew up in North Philadelphia, 12th and Huntington and 17th and Winghahawken. When I went outside, there was always the violent culture, the negative culture, the drugs, and all that stuff. But when I went into the household, it was Earth, Wind, and Fire, Stevie Wonder, Tina Marie. You're getting up early in the morning, you cleaning the house. Your parents is watching. We had positive TV shows. So the difference, I say, is the difference between a full-length movie and a miniseries. A full-length movie has a plot that's locked in for the duration of 2.5, 3 hours. A television miniseries has commercial breaks. So the difference in the mindset of our youth today is there's no commercial break. It's a constant plot, it's a constant theme, or let's just say a constant agenda that's being perpetuated into their mindset. And you're talking about a mindset where the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain which your decision making comes from, doesn't form until 25, 27 years old. So these young men don't have a fully formed brain functioning to make correct decisions, and all they're doing is being programmed by self-devastation. So in that mindset, they feel like what they're doing is what they should be doing because, again, that's what they're just constantly seeing. They're not seeing other youth that are going off to college or getting into, trades or entrepreneurship. They're not seeing that because it's constantly being promoted over just that consistent thing. Everybody out there knows how YouTube works. No matter what you look at, it goes back to what you watch the most, what you listen to the most. When you're on social media, anything you talk about, anything you're around, those ads pop up. The algorithms are not working in the favor of our youth, and we know that that's all programming. So a large part of the communities is that break that we had. You knew right from wrong because even though you were in the midst of wrong, you were around some older people that were giving you wisdom. You're around some older people that was, even we only had one television growing up. So you had to hear in earshot what your parents was listening to, what your parents was watching. We only had one phone in the house. So you had to hear some of the conversations that they were having. But now, like I said, they got earbuds in. Now all the young boys, they wearing the big headphones. So when we think of that, it's shutting out anything positive and just constantly feeding them negative over and over and over again. So that's another reason why what we do in our programming, like that critical thinking piece, is major. We take phones from our young men. Like when they come in, they know they got to get those phones up just to break them away. And what I say, get them out of the matrix. So the one thing that I say is the biggest difference is television miniseries versus a full-length movie, and that programming which is intentional for our youth and changing their mindset. How things have impacted the change in the community has impacted, some of the programming is because of the fact that, a lot of our youth, and not only our youth, that instant gratification, that entitlement that's in our communities where people just expect things and they expect it to come right away. So when we're trying to teach our young men the long game and thinking full circle, it's difficult. A part of it is because, again, all they're seeing is devastation day in and day out, where, again, that programming, they're seeing their peers not make it past 16, 17 years old. Some of my young men in the program, like, it's a celebration when they turn 18. It's a celebration, and it's wild where they're like, like, yo, I made it. And it's sad, when you think about that, but we growing up, it was like not seeing past 25, not seeing past 21. Now it's like not seeing past 15, 16 years old. So the impact from the community on the mindset, and just the lack of hope, for our youth and for our communities. I go back to, again, and a lot of the stuff is by design. Our communities here in Philadelphia, the inner city, man, what I say some of the change is, men could go to work right in the community. We had a lot of factory jobs that men could go to work, not even really have to drive to work. You could walk to work and work in the factory and be able to come home and provide for your family. We know the old stories, how men came home, you give your check to your lady, she take care of the bills, and she give you your portion, you know what I'm saying? But families was good. But then you look at the deficit and the destruction in the black man as a whole, where once you take away those factory jobs, now these men are seeking work. Now, again, we go back to the validation, the insecurity, the inadequacy that we feel as black men, because now I can't provide for my family. So where does that put me with? There's no upliftment when it comes to that. Along with that, we know that they implemented, with the drugs, that whole drug war that we had. You bring crack cocaine into the community, and it hit us from both ends. Because now you got black men that can't make money and provide, but now you give us a way we can make thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and within the time frame. So you're going to chase that. And then the opposite side of it, of getting high on the drugs because you feel inadequate, you want to numb that pain. And we know that that was by design, along with the fact that when they brought the welfare system in and they perpetuated to our women that they don't need men. Because when it was once that man was the provider, now he can't provide. So dad, we struggling as a family. So he can't provide, he's feeling inadequate, he can't find a job. Most of the men in the community only had a high school education at that point. Like that was the norm. So, all right, the man can't provide, he's struggling, he's doing what he's doing, kids still gotta eat. So now the government brings a play in where like now she can go to the government and get a check. Kids gotta eat, so it's survival. So when the kids gotta eat, now she leans towards the government, but then they tell her, yeah, we'll provide this resource for you, but you can't have a man in the house. So a woman's instinct is, I gotta do what's best for my children. That's just the nurturing her. So now she's faced with a realistic challenge, like, what do I choose? Do I choose the father figure and implementing that? Or do I go because these kids is hungry? So you bring that in along with bringing the drugs into the community, and it meets nothing but devastation. And with that being said, a lot of people ask me, like, well, you work so much with the young men, why you don't do nothing with the young girls? I feel like there's a lot for young women, and to the fact that when we talk about reverse engineering these programs, these agendas, we have to have an agenda that's systematically correcting the wrong. So we know that by default, they knew if you destroy the black man, you destroy the black family. If you destroy the black family, you destroy the black community. So in order to repair our communities, we gotta repair the black man so we can repair the black family and then ultimately repair the black community. The black community is destroyed. We all know that. We see it every day. We cry about it, we complain about it, we pray about it. But the reality is we have to really be intentional about what that looks like. Because when you say destroy a black man, what's the best way to destroy a black man? Not let him become a man in the first place. So if you do that, all this self-destruction that's being promoted to our young men, they never make it to manhood. I just said how they're not even making it to 18. So they're never making it to manhood, which it builds on top of the fact of removing the man out of the picture. They've been doing this since day one. It's almost genius how they're still able to do that to this point. But that's where we have to be innovative and proactive about our approach of how we really want to save our communities. It starts with our young men. Love our young women, but it starts with our young men because the young ladies are the ones that are going to date these young men. So we have to be intentional about rebuilding and restructuring them. So really that's the angle we have with that. And then it's all psychologic, the root cause, because I like to say, and it's my personal, perception and interpretation of this whole diabolic agenda that they have, because you're attacking the young men. We know that our communities are held down by our queens, right? So even their mindset, where it goes back to slavery times, it's the same agenda. Like nothing changes, just the players in the game, the pieces in the puzzle change. Slavery, we all, know the historical context where they talked about strange fruit. And when they talk about the strange fruit, that was, blacks hanging from trees, being lynched. Those blacks hanging from trees was more men. So now you're a black mother. You see the devastation and destruction of black men. You have a small child, a boy. Your first instinct is to teach him to not go there, to not do this. And the biggest thing is don't even look him in the eye. So now you're talking about breaking the spirit of kings and warriors from which we came from. And it's because of the fear that was put into the black woman. So now when we once stood upright, now we walk with our head down. I truthfully believe that spirit is still broken in us as black men. And it's the same thing happening now. Again, we think of the visual. Black mother is seeing the destruction in black men, strange fruit hanging for the tree. I'm raising a black boy that's going to become a black man. I don't want that to happen to him, so I'm going to hold him close and I'm going to condition his mind not to do. Present day, media is doing the same thing. All we see is the devastation. All we see is the destruction. So as a black mother, that same fear is embedded in you because I don't want that to happen to my baby boy. So now I'm going to keep him close. I'm going to keep him in the household. I'm going to tell him he can't go outside. I'm going to tell him he can't, oh no, well, I'm going to drive you. So now that coddling that comes in, you're enabling them. And the thing that I say with that is if you enable a boy, you disable a man. Because we as black men, the world is different for us. It shouldn't be that way, but the world is different for us. We have to move different. We got to show up different. And that only comes from men. So that psychological context of all this stuff that's happening, it's all by design. So when we know it's by design, we have to be innovative, we got to be strategic, and we got to be intentional about how do we reverse engineer the damage that's been done. Well, young men that kind of changed my life, man, I'm going to say almost all of them, bro. Like, I tell people all the time, man, I hear people like, yo, man, them young boys need you. And my response is, I need them. Because the reality, like I said, I was still broken myself. Again, I'm coming home from prison. I'm plagued with, I feel like what I need, again, to get back on my feet and make me a man. But it was so much of the reciprocity in this work, where I'm pouring into them, but they pouring into me. They filling me up, just being with them, talking to them and learning from them. And I've learned so much. And one young man I'm gonna say is like my young boy Trey, man, Roland. He was around in the very beginning, as a mentee. Went off to college, went to Robert Morrison University, graduated, dealing in finance and accounting. And he called me and was like, yo, bro, like my folks moving to South Carolina, but I'm gonna be local and I want to help out with the program. So a young man that was once a mentee, now I'm back as a mentor, and actually supported and taught a financial literacy course earlier this year. So when we talk about that reverse engineering, our goal is we want to create a new generation of fathers and husbands. Here, this is a young man who just had his first baby, got his first crib with his lady. So that's that blueprint right there, of what we want to design. We got another young man, Amir, first male in this family to graduate from a 4-year university. So it's those kind of things. Um, I even say, man, like my young boy Mantel was really one of my first, because like I said, it wasn't even a nonprofit. This was from that cohort of 9 weeks that I did at Simon Gratz. And we getting ready to go on our 10-year anniversary, June 7th, man. And he's flying back from Atlanta, to come be a part of that celebration. And he's married and has a baby girl now. So for him to tap in from time to time, over the years, he might come get a haircut, and it's those moments where it really just like, okay, like this thing is working, because it is a grind. That day to day, man, like there's a bunch of meetings, phone calls, just constantly trying to bring me more resources in, to the program so that we can provide for these young men. But it's those type of situations, those phone calls, sometimes those DMs. There's another young man, again, he was locked up with me, Norm. Every once in a while, Norm might, send me a message or text me or something, and it's just like, OG, I see you still working, man. I'm proud of you. And Norm was somebody who, he came home before I did. And when I got home, he caught up with me and we had a conversation. And he's like, man, I just got to thank you, man. And I'm like, yo, for what? He's like, yo, you taught me more in those 6 months that I was around you than my dad taught me my whole life. And to this point now, he's a father working hard, ain't been back to jail. So it's those kind of moments that, like I said, it just becomes full circle and really makes it seem like, not seem, but it's really relevant that, like it's working. These young men are listening, even if they don't act on it right away, they come back and they thank you, for those opportunities that were granted to them. So addressing the issues of gun violence, poverty, and mental health, man. Again, we are early intervention proactive program. I believe in getting them exposure and the opportunity before they make that decision. Again, I keep saying one decision affects a moment or a lifetime. And just, you got to get ahead of those things, because it's all about those decisions and the fact of, a lot of them feel like they have to carry a gun because of what they're seeing. But one, we have a safe haven here. Our young men come here. They know that they're safe. But helping them also to understand, like, it's really about, your surroundings, the people that you hang with, and letting them see that there's other young men that are like them that want to do the right thing. Because again, we go back to the beginning when I said, like, they want to fit in. They want to be a part of something. Who doesn't? Nobody wants to be alone. Nobody wants to feel like they're on an island. So when we build this brotherhood and this fellowship and unity, they get a chance to come in. I've seen so many young men come in shy and not really know anybody and kind of closed off. And then they build in friendships. I got Kenny and Dewan who they met in the program, and still to this day, they graduated out, but they still solid, they still cool. And we see those type of things happen a lot. As far as the poverty is concerned, without workforce development and life skills training, man, because again, I go back to that empowerment through exposure piece. To this day, I still cut hair, and it's 30-something years later. That's a trade that I'm always have. Went to prison for 2 years, came back, still has something that I could tangibly do with my hands to still be able to put food on the table. So we addressed that issue of poverty by, we just had landscaping and lawn care training with the young men, not just cutting grass, but they actually learn how to aerate the grounds, tilling the grounds, aerating and planting grass seeds. These are skills that they could take with them. We do auto detailing this, summertime. Young men learning how to wash cars. We doing photography and videography. We got our screen printing series. Actually, this right here is one of the apparels that our young kings made this themselves. So those things, and it's something of culinary arts. So we just giving them a whole handful of different things that they can make money in real time. Because when we talk about poverty, hunger pains is real, and you wash a car, you get paid. You do somebody's lawn, you get paid. You make some merch, you sell it, you get paid. You do a session taking pictures for somebody's event, you get paid. So these are opportunities that they can make money in real time in that direct service, along with exposing them to the trades, where we're working closely with AFL-CIO, to expose them to the opportunities that trade schools have. Here in Philadelphia, we got apprenticeship programs where these guys can come right out of high school and go into an apprenticeship program where they're paid to learn. Carpentry, electrical, the finishing trades, even technology. So we keep funneling and try to push our young men to college, and college is just not for everybody. Because again, we know that student loans is one of the biggest debts that our communities have. So why not get them into the trades where they can go to school? Again, Kenneth, my young man, Kenny just graduated from the pre-apprenticeship program for the carpentry program this past Monday. He's in play now to be able to go into and having a union carpenter be a sponsor to help him get into the union. Those are opportunities that we're striving to create for our young men. And their entrepreneurial efforts, we're teaching them financial literacy because it's important to teach them how to make the money, but also how do you manage the money. And that goes back to Trey, our other mentor, Brandon. They did a 6-week financial literacy at the beginning of the year just to kick things off on intentional spending, saving, income versus expenses, helping them understand how money works and breaking it all down to them. So we're just trying to hit it from all them areas. And mental health, man, mental health, honestly, to me, is the most important thing. That critical thinking piece is paramount to the work that we do. Me, myself, like I said, part of my story being a recovering addict, man, a lot of what I got involved with because of my thoughts and emotions. Going to jail was my thoughts and my emotions. It always starts there. So we want to make sure that these young men have a safe space, one, where they know that their voice is being heard, being understood, and also to the fact of understanding how to navigate through those thoughts and emotions. So me, myself, I'm coined as the therapist without a degree, but then we work closely. Our vice president, Dr. Courtney Lee, who came to the program from seeing the work. Dr. Lee is like an icon when it comes to the mental health field. Dr. Lee, at 75 years old, was the first Black male to serve as president of the American Counseling Association. And this is back in 1997, when it wasn't made for us or by us, the counseling field. And he broke through barriers, teaching at colleges in North Carolina where racism was paramount. So he does our Rites of Passage program and helps out a lot with the mental wellness that we have. Also working with men in the community as well, because again, going back to that repairing the man is really what our angle is. So mental health is the priority above all things. Because again, my story, I was in position. I was a quote unquote celebrity barber before social media, but it was my thoughts and my emotions that caused me to lose everything. So we want to make sure that we give them the opportunity, but make sure that the opportunity is mirrored and partnered with, that social and emotional learning as well. I'm gonna say that, poverty and safety, I think that they would change that first, because the reality is the hypervigilance that young Black men, in particular, young people, period, face every single day is really feeling like nowhere is safe. They can't go anywhere and be safe. And again, that head on the swivel that we hear, our young people live that, damn near 24/7. They can't go anywhere. It's not like us where, we can go to the playground and shoot hoops and, play 4 or 5 games back to back. We can go downtown and walk the gallery and stuff like that. The streets is just not the same. And I've heard this from my young men where I always say, listen, I don't want to be the OG that's comparing your era to my era. I want to listen to y'all, what's the difference? And they say it. When y'all was growing up, y'all could go more places. Y'all had freedom to work the streets. We really can't do that. So I would say that safety first, primarily, and then also we talk about the economic side of it, because unfortunately, again, what's being perpetuated to them is that, they gotta have this and gotta have that, for their value. So just creating those opportunities, job opportunities, educational opportunities, training opportunities, That would be the biggest thing that I hear from them all the time is, I'm trying to get a job. I'm trying to, like, I want to make some money, or just the fact of them just being honest about the fact that they just don't feel safe anywhere that they go. So those two things would definitely be the things that, first and foremost, I believe is the biggest, issues that our young people face every day. So my dream for the young people in Philadelphia is they would know their worth and know their value. Not let their worth and value be determined by society or what people think about them. My dream would be that they get to a place to realize, how powerful they really are. Again, culturally, knowing where we come from, because that's the one thing that we've lost, those cultural principles, that cultural identity. They need to know that they come from kings, that they come from warriors. They need to know that, even to this day, still, decades later, one of the most richest black men ever was Mansa Musa. And we're not even just black men, richest man in the world, was Mansa Musa, who was an African. They need to know that, we come from a place where it was like the origin of our society and culture as a whole. The original mathematicians, the original scientists, were us. So I believe that what my dream for them is to really know who they are, and be able to define themselves by what they are inward rather than outward. And I know that that's an uphill battle, but that is my dream, that one day we will realize how great we are as a people. Been blessed to even travel, internationally. And you just think about it, like the black culture is mimicked around the world. From fashion and music, hip hop was the stories of our inner cities. And hip hop is the most successful genre of hip hop ever. Past rock and roll and everything. You can't sell a car without hearing hip hop. You know what I mean? Food products without hearing hip hop. And it was once said that it would never last. It was just a fad. It was just a trend. But that's us. You go to Japan, even the breakdance culture, they in it, and that's us. Every other culture mimics the black culture. Every single other culture mimics our culture, but we don't see that as value, and I always say that too. Anybody who's ever stole anything, you steal something because you see value in it. For whatever reason, it's going to add value to you. It's something that you want, you desire. And for them to steal our culture, again, across the globe, our fashion, our music, our culture is duplicated, is replicated. So that's my dream for them. What I would like to tell any of them, as far as like the city and what's needed the most for the youth is their ears. We need to listen to our youth. We need to really sit down and have conversations. And, what I like to say is remove the adultism. And what I mean by that is we see the world as an adult because we've had those experiences and we've bumped our heads. So we have the wisdom. We see the world as adults. Again, we got a fully developed brain. We can make better decisions. So we need, as a city, to realize truthfully the mindset and the emotional state of our young people. We have to be more empathetic about where they are and what they deal with on the day-to-day. Because we know what we feel, what I call vicarious trauma. Again, being that mental health advocate, the vicarious trauma that we face. And when I say that, I mean it from the aspect of that, we see it happening and it hits us, we sick of it. They live it. It's them that's dying. So imagine what that's doing to them psychologically. And to get a glimpse of or a lens of what it's doing to them psychologically is if you ever put on VR glasses and you're looking at something, but your body is reacting as if it's happening to you. We see all these funny clips and stuff like that with people falling over stuff or swinging at stuff that's not there. Your brain is reacting as if it's happening to you. They're seeing devastation every day in themselves. So their brain is reacting to it. Their bodies are reacting to it. So the city as a whole needs to understand the overall damage and impact that's truthfully happened to our young people. Like, it's not just a blanket surface thing. It's a deep-rooted thing that is by design and is destroying them from the inside out. So the reality of it is that a lot of our young people are more afraid to live than they are to die because they got to deal with this every single day. So the fact of the matter is they're already dead inside. We talk about the hopelessness. They already dead. They don't think they're going to live past 15, 16 years old. So understanding what psychologically that's doing to them, we have to be in the loop of that. You know, we got to really sit down and really be sympathetic and empathetic and listen to them. Also, what I would like to see from the city is this, that we got to value our young people more. Because when we look at certain things, oftentimes I feel that we don't value them truthfully as the future. We think about it in the aspect of that, how valuable are they truthfully? Because they don't vote and they don't pay taxes. And we know that from the top down, those things matter. You know, people trying to stay in position, people trying to keep their jobs. And I'm not saying everybody, but we just speaking overall, and the majority, they trying to sustain themselves because everybody's in survival mode. So people that want to stay in position, they worried about being voted in. People that want to stay in position, they worrying about those tax dollars. From a capitalistic standpoint, from a globalistic standpoint, the youth don't matter because they really don't play a part in the big picture. But if they are the future, knowing that they will play a part in the big picture, why don't we nurture them? Why don't we make sure that they make it to that point where they can be a part of the big picture? So really that's what it is for me, you know, where really seeing the value in our young people and letting them know that they are valuable, bringing them to the table, letting them be a part of the conversation of what advice would I give a youth leader? Get involved. Oftentimes, and again, especially from, you know, a male standpoint, and I'm gonna keep saying that, you know, young men need men. And I'm gonna say that just to emphasize that I like to give context of the why. Like I said, it ain't the what, it's the why. Even years ago, National Geographic did an experiment and they studied young male elephants. And they brought him into the cage in captivity and they tore this cage up, destructive, and they observing him. And the minute that they brought an adult male elephant into the cage, two things happened. They calmed down, one, but then they began to mimic what they saw the adult male elephant doing. So the importance of males, adult males, in the life of young males is paramount because they mimic. Again, they're trying to learn. We go back to childhood where, you know, that 0 to 7 years, you know, children learn how to walk from what they see. They learn how to talk from what they hear. So again, you know, Mom Dukes is there 9 times out of 10. But if there's no male figure there for young males, what are they mimicking? So they need males to be around. But I'll say this too, that I get it that a lot of us, you know, we grown boys. You know, like I said, I was broken when I even first started this work, and I had to seek therapy for myself because what I didn't want to do, I didn't want to bleed on the people I lead. And I realized a lot of my work in that moment was because I was trying to heal little Taj. So that people pleasing, let me show up for these young boys because nobody showed up for me. And that's good to a degree because if you're not whole, you get caught up in that. So for me, I had to go to therapy. I started therapy in 2017, 2 years after having the program. And therapy is the best thing I've ever done in my life, man. You know, my therapist is now one of my board members. She's no longer my therapist because of just seeing the importance of what she brings to the table and how she helped save me from myself. So she's now a board member and I have another therapist. So I make sure that I tap in with my mental, you know, because again, like, you know, that as a youth leader, you gotta be willing to take a look at yourself. You got to be willing to sit down and say, hey, I want to do this work. I'm willing to do this work. But how can we, work together? So as youth leaders, we come together, like our mentors, like we meet. We meet once a month, and we build, we fellowship, we pour into one another, and that's even where Dr. Lee comes in and help to guide us in our mentor development key. And one thing that I would say is the most underrated characteristic about a youth leader, the selflessness, the sacrifice, the commitment, the dedication, because it's not about you, and you really got to realize, I even say this, not taking things personal. That's the biggest underrated characteristic of a youth leader, because you understand where they're coming from. You know that they're broken. You know that, they've been let down. So if they're not responding in the beginning, you can't take it personal. You got to be able to be patient, and being empathetic to the fact, okay, I'm a circle back around. I'm here, man. Okay, cool. And eventually, because thinking about it, they've been abandoned so much, they've been let down so much. One of the things that I overcame is, I call it my couch moment. As a kid, my dad not showing up, and even though he ain't come the first 20 times, the 21st time he gonna be here, and I'm fully dressed, sitting on the couch waiting for him to come, never shows up. So realizing that as a youth leader, that 9 times out of 10, these young men are dealing with that same aspect. So you got to keep showing up, regardless of how they might respond in the beginning. But over the course of time, they be like, "Dad, he really sincere," because they could feel that, real recognize real. So that underrated, definitely not taking it personal, the selflessness, the sacrifice, man, and I'll definitely say authenticity too. Authenticity, showing up as who you are and not trying to put on a facade. Those will be the main things. Kasaran and Gara. What is that? Kasaran and Gara is the greeting of the Messiah warriors in the Swahili language, and it means "empower the children." Now, historically, the Messiah warriors were noted as the most mightiest, but also the most intelligent warriors across the plains of Africa. They maintained his reputation for centuries, and people would like to say it's because of this principle of this greeting, "empower the children." Because from one warrior to another, that would be the question, "and how are the children?" And that other warrior would respond and saying that the children are well. And that just speaks to the context of the priority and also the ownership of making sure that the next generation coming behind them were good. So that's why for centuries, they maintained being the most mightiest and the most intelligent warriors across the plains of Africa. And then I asked the question, what if we had a government that was governed with the same principles? And how are the children? And our response being the children are well. Because these days we really can't say that our children are well. What if we had a school system that was governed on that same principle of empower the children and being able to say that the children are well? Because again, we can't say that our children are well. What if we had households, parenting, that their sole premise and principle was empower the children and responding that the children are well? So these principles really set the tone for understanding what this work looks like with Men of Courage. Because our biggest thing is understanding how are the children and answering the question, are the children are well? So a book that inspired my work is, I read this book by Dr. Miles Monroe called Understanding the Purpose and Power of Men. And I read this book when I was incarcerated, and one of the first things it talks about is the identity of the Black man and how that identity has diminished or is really gone. So when we think of the context of so many men are trying to find their identity as a Black man, but there really is no identity there. Because even when we look at the context of our current society, what Black men would you say that you really look up to? Or more importantly, for our young men, what Black man are they looking up to that's really a solid individual for our communities? So that book helped shape a lot of understanding, how I move, because again, I was seeking those examples. I was looking for that identity. And it really wasn't until like getting in some trouble and like going to church and start seeing, some positivity in brothers. But again, it's just broken for the most part that our young men don't see it. So for me, understanding what the purpose and power of men, that book changed a lot of who I am. It helped me understand a lot of my decision making when I was seeking those identities, or those examples. So that shaped my work. A movie that shapes my work, I would have to say, thinking back, I gotta say The Matrix, man. Like, a lot of people don't really understand the gems and the lessons that's in that movie, where we living in the Matrix. We see it every day. Our youth, our society as a whole, trapped in these phones, technology, and it's not real. In the movie, The Matrix broke down so much of what he thought was real life that he really was inside of, the computer system. And he didn't know that it wasn't reality until he came to his senses and Morpheus was having those conversations of showing him really what it was. So that movie shapes a lot of how I see things, and that's why my goal is to pull our young men away from the Matrix so they can see what life truthfully is and be able to grasp the concepts of how life really navigates. A song, I got a couple. One song that always hits me is the joint. It's from this movie called Freedom Riders, and it's a song by Common and Will I Am. I Had a Dream, and I just think about that. Like, our youth don't dream anymore. They don't have an imagination. They don't hope for much. But then also, I gotta say, I don't know, man. It's Marvin Gaye, man. What's going on? Between Marvin Gaye, what's going on, and Grandmaster Flash, and The Message. You listen to those songs, and they still relevant today. The messaging, the lyrics, even though the times have changed, it stays the same. And that's where my premise when it comes to, talking to the youth, and like I say, even though the times have changed and the era is not the same, the one thing that hasn't changed is the thoughts and emotions that we go through as young men, as black men as a whole. Me growing up in late 70s, early 80s, I was afraid, I felt lonely, disappointed, abandoned, misguided, all of those things. To bring it to 2025, our young men today still have the same feelings, so that doesn't change. So thinking of the longevity of the messaging of those two songs of What's Going On and The Message by Grandmaster Flash. So the message that I have for the youth as a whole, but in particular to my young men, I call you young kings because of the royalty that's in you. I call you young kings because of the greatness that's in you. I call you young king because of the light that shines from the inside out. And I understand that your environment or your society is telling you the total opposite. But I need you to know that the greatness, the royalty, and the light is there. You just got to tap into it. You just got to lean into it. Grab hold of a solid OG, somebody that has been there, and really hold tight. Because we've had experiences that you've had, maybe not exactly the same, but we've been through some stuff too. So tap into them, get the wisdom, get the understanding, but more importantly, get the love. A lot of times y'all don't, you don't really trust people, and I get it. I've been there too. But seek out that one individual, that one OG, that could really give you some game. And don't be afraid to try new things. It's hip to be square. I worked so hard to be a thoroughbred, and a thoroughbred got me in jail. So be okay with the fact that everybody might not like you, but at the end of the day, Your life is exactly that, your life. Your future is exactly that, your future. You own it. You're responsible for it. Nobody else is. Take advantage of opportunities. Take advantage of the people who want to pour into you because it's going to pay off one day. So this is a little something that I wrote for all my young kings out there. Dear young king, you have no idea how powerful you really are. Your inner light shines brighter than the brightest star. This world is threatened because they see what you don't see. And their biggest fear is what you'll grow up to be. What they see is endless potential, strength, and the ability to become great. But they know that all depends on your current mind state. So they poison your thoughts with images of self-destruction and hopelessness, which has stripped your imagination, your ability to dream, and your self-consciousness. You're programmed to believe that your identity lies in material things or who likes your posts, when all reality is seen through those who love you the most. In due time, you'll see who's who and who's really your friend. So never get shade of front on those who were there for you in the beginning, because they'll be there in the end. I know Mom Dukes be drawn and she's getting on your last nerves. But trust and believe, she'll be there, the main one there when that time needs to be served. See, you keep thinking that your priority is avoiding the cops and lining up your ops. But nah, young blood, this shit starts at the top. It's the corrupt government and the capitalist society that really ain't right. But you're programmed to be out here fighting the wrong fight. They're geniuses for having us still thinking that the enemy is us, when if you peel back the layers, you'll see it's really them who's not to trust. And oh yeah, let me apologize for all the times that my generation of men has let you down. We were all burdened with our own traumas and afraid that someone wants to steal our crown. See, we fought long and hard for our seats on this throne because we had to do it from the mud when nobody would throw us a bone. And like you, no man has ever taught us how to love, so all we know is pain. Then you see hurt people, and that at least left the ugly stain. But the cycle has to stop somewhere, so why not with us today? I've been trying in my own way for so long, but maybe you can show me a different way. Or better yet, let's learn together and create our own path. Create something that you could pass on to the next generation so that way it could last. Now that's a legacy, and it's something to make us proud. Then our voices will no longer be silenced because our presence will be too loud. Young king, you are the future, and we need you to know one thing, that life is chess, not checkers. So in order for us to win, we must protect our kings. Be safe, youngin. So I definitely want to give a huge shout out to everybody who supported over the past 10 years, the people that believed in the vision, the mission. I always say it's for the community, by the community, man. Oftentimes when there was no funding, you, the community, supported these efforts from our fish fries, fundraisers, or just donations. So we want to thank everyone out there. I definitely want to thank my mentors that stand alongside me, starting with Dr. Lee, my VP, Brian Moore, Brandon Burchett, Roland King, and Stan Daniels. Like, I appreciate y'all brothers for stepping in, believing in the vision and the dream, man, and being an example for our young kings. Shout out to my board members. Shout out to my communications team, who y'all the front line of defense, for the parents and communicating with the parents and distributing the information out. Shout out to all you. Shout out to Jared Holland, man. Like, again, I go back to that first moment of exposure, man. I'm always indebted to you for that opportunity that you gave me, which really helped to change my life. Shout out to my man, Rasheed Wallace, man. I don't think you really realize, how valuable, you were to my life, man, just in those moments of placing a phone call and trusting me. And I know we had a lot of fun, a lot of party and bullshit, but realistically, man, like, you did something for me that really changed the trajectory of my life, and a lot of the experiences that I have, and the reason why I'm able to help these young men understand that there's more to life is because of the opportunities that you gave me as well. We already know, man, Mom Dukes, man, love you. It was you that was my reason for wanting to get back on track. Being a high school dropout, you didn't deserve it because of all the sacrifices of not only raising me, but also raising my cousins. Like our house was like that house. You made sure everybody was straight. So just thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for showing me what hard work looks like. And Pops, and I'm just blessed that we were able to, restore what was broken, for so many years of not being there. And I had to understand of listening to your story and realizing that the same resentment that I had towards you, you had towards your father. And, you couldn't be something that you didn't have, so really being an example of what forgiveness looks like. Pops, I love you for that, man. And, you Johnny on the spot now. I call you, you there. And just the courage that we have, we were both men of courage, the courage to have those hard conversations, the courage to cry about it and have that forgiveness. I'm grateful for that because a lot of men go to the grave and never had those conversations and being able to have that closure. And I'll never forget that day that we had our talks. And I felt like it was a good day, just reminiscing on the day. And I broke down in tears, uncontrollable tears. I'm snot the whole nine. And I'm asking God, like, yo, God, what's up? What's wrong? And that's when it hit me that little Taj got what he always wanted, his pop. So Pops, shout out to you, man, for the willingness and the courage, just to break that generational curse that's still plaguing our communities to this day. So again, to all of you, thank you for helping to shape, the man that I am today, but also being a foundation for what Men Occur is celebrating this 10 years has been.